The US dollar is the largest reserve currency. It's the one currency in the world that you can bring to any country and exchange. But what happens if the United States dollar is one day replaced by the Chinese yuan? This might be crazy to many people, but consider this. Since 2000, the dollar has declined from 71% to a 59% share in the worldwide central bank reserves. Have a look in this report of IMF, entitled The Stealth Erosion of Dollar Dominance. It says the Chinese yuan has provided the largest single source of dollar erosion. What is the future of the dollar in our world economy? Well, let's break it down in today's video. Since China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, China has gradually surpassed the US as the major supplier of goods to Europe, Asia, Africa, and South America. If China and its partner agreed to use their respective currencies for trade, the demand for the yuan would be astronomical, and this would accelerate the Chinese yuan toward becoming a key world reserve currency. Currently, 125 countries around the world count China as their biggest trade partner. Holding yuan would reduce transaction costs, minimize exchange rate volatility. But there is one additional reason that many nations are now considering, which is you can also avoid the US sanctions. We need to look no further than the US sanctions against Russia to see why many nations are now considering becoming less dependent on the US dollar. Let's first analyze the purpose of sanctions against Russia. The stated goal from the US was to significantly damage the Russian economy, or one senior US official put it, the sanctions would push the Russian currency into free fall. This weaponization of the US dollar is a very new kind of war that America can use to punish their adversaries. This has profound implications for the future of international politics and economies. In reality, it could become the single biggest factor to more countries moving away from the US dollar. After World War II, we were taught that globalization prevents future conflict. It would bring former enemies closer together in a new global economy. But now this new global economy has actually become the new battleground. The US dollar is the most used currency for trade and financial transactions. In addition, America's capital markets are the deepest in the world. As a result, it's very difficult for companies, central banks, and even countries to operate if they are cut off from the US dollar. The sanctions on the Russia's central bank are the first time this weapon has been used against a major economy and the first time that it has been used as part of a war. In the West, there is certainly a feeling that we should do something to stop the war in Ukraine. But it's also important to assess the cost of these sanctions and likelihood of their success. These sanctions most likely will promote a backlash against US dollar in global finance. In the 6th week in sanctioned Russia began, the Russian currency has already recovered most of its value it initially lost. These moves to freeze Russia's reserves marks a historic shift in the conduct of foreign policy. Joe Biden stated that these economic sanctions are a new kind of economic statecraft with the power to inflict damage that rivals military might. Even when sanctions work, they take a long time to have an impact. However, the economic pain for the crisis is being felt around the world, more specifically in Europe, who is heavily dependent on Russian oil and gas. Germany, the powerhouse economy of the EU, imports approximately one-third of its gas from Russia. It's clear the US and its allies will stay committed to their plan of using economic sanctions to put pressure on Putin. But Western governments have not defined what Russia would need to do for sanctions to be lifted, with no end date in sight Russia is adopting. Last week, Vladimir Putin stated that, "I've decided to implement a set of measures to transfer payments for our gas supplies to unfriendly countries into Russian rubles. It is clear that delivering our goods to the European Union, the US, and receiving dollars, euros, and other currencies no longer makes sense to us." India has responded to this change by setting up a rupee-ruble payment scheme to bypass sanctions. This could be very dangerous to India. They are risking international sanctions in exchange for access to the Russian market. But India is in a difficult position. The country is largely dependent on Russian wheat, sunflower oil, and energy. We truly live in a global economy, and you can now clearly see how using trade sanctions against one nation has a ripple-down effect across the globe. Are the Russian sanctions accelerating the shift away from the US dollar? Listen to the advice from one of America's most successful investors, Jim Rogers.
The US dollar has owned the world for decades, but now, because of US actions, We're shooting ourselves in the foot. The Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians are coming up with competing currencies and competing institutions to compete with the World Bank, to compete with the IMF. I don't like saying this, I'm an American, but America is shooting itself in the foot. So there are many competitors coming, being forced by American trade action.
But where exactly are the biggest competitors coming from? Richard Turin, a top 100 global fintech influencer, shares his insights. Many nations are almost 100% exposed to the US dollar in their trade, and they now have to start thinking of de-dollarizing. What you are going to see is a slow rollback of their use of the dollar, by small amounts, maybe to 85% or 80%, just to reduce their dollar exposure. This is risk management rather than an aversion to the US. To do that, they are going to look for an alternative payment system, and in a few years they are going to move to the yuan, and particularly the digital and for trade. China's central bank digital currency, or CBDC, is a future technology that will greatly impact the future of global trade. Richard Turin explains more.
You say has got the lead in the race to build out a central bank, a global central bank digital currency?
Without question, China. China is ahead in all of financial technology by a decade. It will take the U.S. easily another 5 years just to get out of planning and trials.
So just to clarify then, Richard, the digital yuan, can it really subvert the dollar's hegemony?
The answer is now it's not going to subvert dollar hegemony, but we have to be thinking in the future. And if we go about 5 to 10 years out, yes, the digital yuan can play a significant role in reducing the dollar's usage in international trade. Remember, China is the largest trading country, and you're going to see digital yuan slowly supplant the dollar when buying things from China.
Currently, there are around 70 central banks around the globe that hold the Chinese yuan and their foreign reserve portfolios. As China's economy continues to grow, this number will likely expand as the world watches economic sanctions against Russia. Many countries are starting to worry if they will be the next target of the US sanctions. As shown in the graph, this is a legitimate risk countries must now consider. The US and Western Union countries have only become more aggressive in using sanctions, with the United States leading the world with over 60 active cases. As I have presented in today's video, China is in a strong position as the world leader in trade. Over the long term, countries will bypass the US dollar and hold Chinese Digital Yuan to trade directly with China. The US dollar will still maintain its position as the world currency for the short term. More countries will look to hold a variety of foreign reserve currencies. No country wants to be 100% exposed to the US dollar anymore. It is simply too risky. Think of this like investing. You don't want to invest all your money into a single company, but rather reduce your risk by spreading out your investments over several companies. This is called diversification, and this is an investing 101. Because the US government is weaponizing the US dollar, the long-term effect will be a weaker US dollar that less countries around the world will want to hold. If you are an American, this should concern you. Since the start of the COVID-19, 80% of the US dollar in the market have been printed in the last 24 months by the Federal Reserve. America is the largest debtor nation in the world, and inflation is at 40-year high. What will the US dollar look like by 2030? Once again, I will give an American investor, Jim Rogers, the final word.
2030, does the US still remain the reserve currency? 2030, Jim?
Absolutely not.
By 2030?
Much sooner than that. The dollar's going to go higher now because of the turmoil which is coming, but then it's going to get overpriced, and people are going to look around and say, America's the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. It's printing money as fast as it can. We have to have something else. If I were a betting man, which I'm not, it would be the currency which is being formed by the nations which have to, because they're being bossed by the Americans and they don't like it anymore and they have enough power.
Well, that's it for today's video, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next video. Till then, stay safe and goodbye.